Have you ever woken up in a war zone? I have. It's honestly probably one of the more stranger places I've woken up. And for the only fact that I am not a soldier, I am a civilian by far. However, I do have friends and family that were soldiers, but I've never been in a war zone myself. When you're a civilian, someone that's never been in a war zone and has only watched movies, it's weird waking up in a battle zone. It's not so much scary per se, just unusual. I've woken up and I've only had two occasions of waking up in a war zone. One way before I've even started watching war movies. When I was around 5 or 6, I was sleeping. I went to bed, my bunk bed, my brother in the bunk above me. We were little. We only had one room for us boys. So he slept in the bunk above me, and I slept on the bottom bunk. I went to bed, and in the middle of the night, I'm not sure exactly what time it was because, well, I didn't have a clock to look at like I do now, or a cell phone. This was back in 2005, 2006. So cell phones were not unheard of, but they weren't anywhere like they are today. I was sleeping, and I remember, well, when I say wake up in a war zone, I don't mean you wake up in reality in a war zone. No, I mean waking up in your dream. When the dream is so vivid that you assume, you just act like it's reality. But that's where it's different when you're in a war zone and you're not supposed to be there. I woke up in Iraq or Baghdad or somewhere in the Middle East, I'm not sure. We were crossing a bridge, me and the rest of the unit, and the bridge broke after everyone crossed. I was the last one over while I was crossing, and I fell down into the deep chasm, and everything went black. Still felt like I was falling, and I woke up, and I was in my room. I just sat there in the darkness, took a few breaths, and eventually I drifted off back to sleep. That's the first time I woke up in a war zone. The second time I woke up in a war zone was more recent, except this war zone was a lot crazier. This was not a modern day war zone. This was something different. It was almost cartoony in fashion in some spots. In other spots it was more real than anything. I woke up on the ground, took in my surroundings of this new area that I had never been before. Looked over to my left, looked over to my right, and I saw grass, birds, the sky was gray, and there was a red barn behind me. I realized that, so I scooched myself up onto the barn and just sat there, taking in my surroundings. And then I realized where I was. I was in a war zone in World War II, in a farmhouse. Looked over to my left, and there, laying on the ground, was one of my comrades, or what I assume was one of my comrades. I got up, picked up a gun and a bag, and kept moving. All of a sudden, I started hearing explosions, mortars hitting the ground. I ducked behind another shed, and there was me. It was me, two people that were comrades. I'm not sure if they were in my unit or what, but that's how I realized I was in World War II, just by the uniform. U.S. military issue green uniforms from World War II. One of the guys, there was an explosion, and one of the guys was screaming. No sound, I couldn't hear anything. The other guy was saying, "Get over here, help." So I ran over there. I'm all in my dreams still, by the way. I ran over there, started bandaging the guy up, and then the one guy threw him on his back, and we started moving. Moved, kept moving, and then more explosions hit. I ran for my life to the nearest building, ducked inside, and realized one of the mortars had taken out the other two. And then someone threw me to the ground. As I was looking over at the others screaming in pain, looked up at this figure. It was not a soldier of this world, at least. This was what I can only assume to be a reaper of some kind, or the angel of death. Maybe both. Who knows? But he started speaking to me. I felt my body, the weight of my body, finally came to fruition, and I was able to realize I had to wait this moment, and the being picked me up, brought me close, and started speaking to me. I couldn't hear what it was saying, and if I even could hear what it was saying, I couldn't understand it. It was speaking something like tongues or something like that. Not sure. But it was definitely speaking a language I could not understand. When I was younger, I used to live by the woods, and could see a cemetery from my back porch. One Easter, I remember waking up and seeing the Easter Bunny, one of those terrifying costumes. And what really gets me is I remember smelling the wet hay when I woke up. I didn't tell anyone, but there was an extra Easter egg in my house that my parents didn't hide. Years later, when I was in high school, I asked my parents if they ever dressed up like the Easter Bunny and came into our room. They said they would never go through so much trouble. And then my younger sister, who I shared a bunk bed with when this happened, she remembers the Easter Bunny, came into our room, made a remark about the hay smell. I was terrified that we both remembered seeing a person dressed as the Easter Bunny in our room. To make it even stranger, I told friends I sat with at lunch what happened. One of the girls was my neighbor across the street. She told me one Easter a long time ago she looked out her window and during the night and saw the Easter bunny standing in her driveway. I had chills. To this day, I'm terrified of people in rabbit costumes. When my niece was really young, she was in a bouncer at my sister's house. I was house and babysitting. I had left to go to the kitchen to grab some water. My sister's chocolate labs were probably sniffing and licking her head because I could hear her giggling like she was having a blast. I hadn't noticed how cold it had gotten, and then I heard it, a loud wind snap, like a thick piece of wood had been snapped in half. Suddenly, the tree was knocked over, as in half. Suddenly, or a tree was knocked over. I ran into the room, and what I saw and smelled freaked me out. The dogs were huddled in the corner, whimpering. My niece was still staring at the ceiling corner with wide eyes, and it was cold and smelled like set sun. I took her and we decided to go to a different room. When my sister finally came home, I told her what happened. She just rolled her eyes and said, "That is Hugh." I was confused. She said Hugh was the previous owner of the house, who had died 10 years before his wife sold it. She said he likes to follow my niece around, and you can tell it's him because dogs freak. It gets cold and smells like cheap cologne. I don't believe in that shit, but I do believe that feeling you get in your gut when something doesn't feel right. In college, I would go home every other weekend to work at the job I had since high school. I would drive directly from campus after my last class on Friday to my job, about an hour. And after my shift was done, I'd go back to my parents' house, which was out in the middle of nowhere. My parents weren't yet home when I got back from work. They often spend their Friday and Saturday evenings drinking, like they were the ones in college. So, the house was dark, and since it was mid-fall, so was the yard. Save for the yard light, I pulled into my normal parking spot, got out of the car, and turned to open the back door of my car and get my backpack out of the back seat. That's when I noticed the bathroom light was on. I pulled up. Must have been right. As I was contemplating the light and reaching for my backpack, there was suddenly a very angry-looking old woman standing in the window, staring at me. We're not talking resting bitch face here either. She was pissed off at me, and I knew it. We stood there staring at each other for a good 10 seconds when my parents pulled into the driveway and distracted me from my stare down with the woman in the bathroom. and by the time I turned back, the light was still on, but the woman was gone. I used to volunteer at a nursing home where we had several instances where new residents accurately described former residents down to specific nightgowns or color of glasses who I and the staff knew had died in that room, and complained about them coming into the room at night. Then once I was walking through the hallway, and it was normally uncomfortably warm inside, but I felt a chill and goosebumps. One of the CNAs said I had just walked through a ghost. I couldn't get warm again for the rest of the day. There were flickering lights and TVs turning themselves on. Several of the staff were from the same Southeast Asian country, and they were talking about ghosts and disrespect for the dead, so much that management had someone come in to do candlelit ceremony, and this lady with crystals and dreadlocks came in to do a sage brushing. Things calmed down after that. Lights stayed on better, and residents seemed calmer. I was in my sophomore year of high school. I would usually get ready and then wait for my mother to drive me to school. While she was getting ready, I was just kind of hanging out in the bathroom with her while she was putting on makeup and curling her hair. She looked a little frazzled, and I asked if everything was okay. She told me about a weird occurrence the night before. She told me that she had been woken up at around 2 by strange noise. It was super loud, but it was pretty constant. My dad wasn't woken up by it, though it's not surprising as he sleeps like a log anyways. She starts looking for the source of a noise, first checking the bathroom attached to their room, but there isn't anything in there. Next, she walks into the hall, hears the noise from the bathroom nearby. When she walks in, she sees a hairdryer plugged in and turned on, just sitting in the middle of the bath mat on the floor. She thinks it's strange, but there are 4 kids living in the house, and she thought maybe someone had sleepwalked and turned it on. Whatever. She unplugs it, and puts it away. She goes back to bed, eventually falls asleep. About an hour later, she wakes up and hears the same noise. She's kinda pissed off and goes to check it out again, except now the noise is from downstairs. She tracks it into the guest bathroom in the main entry hall. My parents' house has like 4 bathrooms. She opens the door again, and there's a hairdryer turned on, lying in the middle of the floor. She's freaked out by this point. But she unplugs it and puts it away. She didn't get a great night's sleep after that. So she's telling me the story, and as soon as she comes to the conclusion, we both just freeze and turn our heads into the walk-in closet of her bathroom. As soon as we look in there, the entire light on the ceiling shatters. Not the light bulb, but the glass cover. It shatters, sending shards of glass everywhere. Well, we both freak out and get the heck out. We didn't know what to make of it, but we haven't really had any experiences before or since, and none of my family have experienced anything either. I was a caretaker of a small, uninhabited island off the coast of Maine. My girlfriend and I started having synchronized nightmares about things that we had never discussed before. They involved very specific themes, and after a month of this happening, we were gifted a history book of the island that had a small chapter in the back that mentioned the exact hauntings. My mother was having dinner at a friend's house. It was a small old cottage that's been around for 100 years. She tries to find the bathroom and pulls on a door. It's locked. The friend sees and says, "Sorry, that goes to the basement. The bathroom is over there." Thinking it's odd, my mother asks why the basement door is locked. It's always locked. In fact, I don't even have a key for it. The real estate agent advised me not to go down there as it's not been upgraded like the rest of the cottage. It's little more than a root cellar. Fast forward a few weeks when my mother, who works for the police department community division, is working on a project about the history of the police department in town. An old man comes in with news clippings about various community events, as well as a news clipping from the 50s about gruesome murder. My mom was a bit taken back. "Sorry, I forgot those clippings were here too." "No, I know the address is my friend's house." "What happened there?" "Oh," said the old man. "Well, that used to be my mother's house. She had been dating this man for a little bit who was cruel to her. Beat her horribly. She tried again and again to break it off with him, but he'd always come back. Finally, my aunt moved in with us. My mother finally broke up with him. He starts getting emotional, and then one night he broke in and tied my mother, aunt, and sister and brother up in the basement. He shot them all in front of my mother and then shot her. He killed himself, leaving a note that would never leave him again. I was away at college," he started to sob. "And that is how my mother's friend learned. She has a haunted quadruple murder suicide scene in her basement. She moved out about a year later." A good friend of mine, while doing his rounds as a young intern, he is now a neurosurgeon and had just looked in on a dying patient. After making the patient comfortable, he exited the room, sat on a nearby chair to write his report. After a few minutes, he looked up and saw this patient walking down the hallway. He called to the woman, but there was no response. He stood up to walk after her. She disappeared. He quickly walked toward the patient's room and saw a light under the door. When he opened the door, it was completely dark in the room. So he turned on the light, went over to the patient, and felt for her pulse. She had died. He swears to this experience. While in university, I loved finding snakes. I was a biology student, so a friend from herpetology club showed me this road that he would cruise for snakes, cruising is when you drive slowly down old back roads after dark looking for snakes that have slithered onto the warmer road to heat up. The road we took was about 4 miles and had around 4 laps on this road. And we were making our final pass. There are 2 houses near the beginning of the road, one at the end and one near the middle. We are getting close to the center house when we see movement on the left side of the road. There are a lot of animals obviously on the road, so we aren't surprised to see this. However, what shoots out is this kid, probably 8 or 9, in torn blue jeans, a ripped dark shirt. He takes one look at us, and his face is mixed of fear, pain. He looked back really quick from where he had come looked across the road. The guy I'm with gets out of the car, chasing to see if he's alright, and I pull the car up to the point where the boy went into the woods. I'm starting to get out of the car when my friend walks quickly back on the trail and just says, "Let's go now." We hop in the car and tear out of there. He says there was a graveyard about 10 yards into the woods where there are gravestones with the same death date. They all had the same last name, and one was a boy who was 9. He came back the rest of the summer. He never came back the rest of the summer to the road. We usually would go out once or twice a week. The next year, when my friend had graduated, I took my girlfriend out to the road. We had gone early to try to find different types of snakes. Different snakes tend to move at different points, dusk, night, so on and so forth. We got to the house near the graveyard, and there's 3 men doing some yard work. I rolled down the window and explained what I was doing and asked them about the graveyard. Apparently, their dad's brother's family had all died when their space heater caught fire around 20 years ago. I kept pushing and asking about it, and they told me the firemen, or whoever does it, had found all the bodies in rubble except for the youngest son, but they assumed he was too far burned. I asked if they had a little brother, about 6'4", 250 pound. Man said he was the youngest when I gave the description of the kid I saw, and they all went white. They all have individually seen the kid I was talking about, and he always runs to the gravesite. I have never been down the road again.